Oh. Today, we'll hear from Kathy Jentz and Teri Speight, the authors of The Urban Garden, 101 Ways to Grow Food and Beauty in the City. Kathy is the editor and publisher of Washington Gardener magazine. A lifelong gardener, Kathy believes that growing plants should be stress-free and enjoyable. Her philosophy is inspiration over perspiration. Teri is the former head gardener for the city of Fredericksburg, Virginia, and one of the founding farmers of the Ite CSA, Stafford County's first transitional organic CSA farm. Please welcome Kathy and Teri.
Thanks, Emma. Teri, if you want to unmute, I'm going to go ahead and share our slideshow.
And thanks everyone for attending.
Let's get that from the beginning. There we go. All right. So Teri and I are going to switch off slides and then maybe share a few. This is our cover of our book, The Urban Garden, as Emma said, 101 Ways to Grow Food and Beauty in the City. And it's meant to be inspirational and educational from beginner level up. And I hope all of you get some great ideas for your gardens in our talk today. Anything to add, Teri?
No, inspiration is key, and we're in the season. And even though we have no clue whether we know it's June, but it feels like July. But even now you can start anticipating how you can be inspired to change your garden around this fall.
Great. And we're going to leave a few minutes at the end for Q&A. So go ahead at any time and put your questions in the chat and we'll catch up with them at the end. So let's dive in since we have a quick hour to go. So I'm going to cover some of the challenges of urban, city, and small space gardens. So no matter where you garden, you probably have these to some degree. Challenges that you have to deal with, but especially in urban, city, and small space gardens, these are even more compressed and bigger challenges for those. So first is privacy, just getting a place to meditate or enjoy your garden without everybody watching you or your neighbors being right on top of you. So we'll talk about some privacy solutions. And then pollution, trash, and noise kind of all go together. So that could be air pollution, that could be noise pollution of traffic, of neighbors, of overhead planes or helicopters. If you're like me, near Walter Reed, I have lots of helicopter pressure and traffic. So we'll talk about some ways your garden can help alleviate and help with those. And then finally, theft in a couple ways. In the human way, people seeing into and noticing your beautiful produce or flowers might want to help themselves. But also I have a picture here of a little rodent trap. Because we know in the city, especially in urban gardens, that we have heavy pressure from pest wildlife. So we want to welcome the wildlife we love, but other wildlife want to come and destroy our gardens. So we'll talk about some ways that we can rodent, maybe, and deer proof some of our gardens. So I'm going to pass it to Teri now to talk about the benefits of urban and small gardens.
Well, let me tell you, in this heat, that's the biggest benefit of having a small space garden. You don't have to go far. This heat is murderous. Having a small space to garden in provides the perfect setting to interact with your neighbors and others. I have a small urban front yard garden, and when people come into my cul-de-sac, they will stop and want to chat with me. Why? Because it's visible, smack dab in the middle, and I'm outside in it. Sharing resources. If you're dividing plants, what a great way to share with somebody else that you know has similar conditions and even a small space garden. That way you don't have to buy plants, so you're saving money. Exposure to other ideas and cultures. Once again, I'm in a cul-de-sac. My neighbors, two of them are Hispanic. One does not garden. The other one is always giving me something new to try. Being exposed to that cultural experience up close and personal, one of the best benefits of gardening in a small space and in community. And then there's that connection with nature. Many times I will sit on my front stoop and watch the lightning bugs and watch the dragonflies. If you have a massive lawn or a massive garden, you might not get to check those things out up close and personal. Small spaces provide that.
Thanks, Terry. Yeah, and I think I saw my first fireflies of the season last night. And
Oh,
I think
mine
we
was
would say
last week.
fireflies in the DC area. Some people say lightning bugs, right?
Yeah. I
Depends
say
what
lightning bugs.
yeah, depends where you're from. You might say.
Yes.
Here. All right, so I'm going to dive in and take over the section on use what space you do have. So with Washington Gardener Magazine, which is based in Washington, D.C., and my podcast, Garden DC, I get a lot of listener and reader questions about, I don't have space to garden. Where can I garden? So obviously you can apply to a local community garden to get a plot there. You can ask friends and relatives. You can even see if your place of work might have a rooftop space or some unused space that you might be able to garden in. But I give this example here of a woman who lives on Rhode Island Avenue, a super busy thoroughfare in Washington, D.C., and she's gardening fully on a parking pad in a basement apartment. And most people who are in that situation would say, I have no space to garden. But look at how much she is growing in this little space here. She's got perennial sedums, she's got irises, she's got some tomatoes and herbs up here in her full sun on the right. And then she's got annual flowers in the boxes around the windows to the front. And I just thought this is a great example of squeezing it all in where you can. And then a little bit higher budget, a small backyard on Capitol Hill. This is a tiny little pool. It looks like it's big. It's not. It's about 3 foot by 3 and just about 6 inches deep, just to dip your toes in. So if you look at the table in the chaise lounge, that kind of gives you the scale. So their entire garden is 1 foot wide by about 12 feet long along this fence line. So 12 square feet of growing space. But they've maximized it by growing this native amethyst falls, a wisteria vine and shrubs. And I think there's some herbs down here. So it's a great example of maximizing, again, the space you have. And then here's another little basement apartment where she's got a full vegetable garden, including eggplants, tomatoes, peppers, and even some marigolds up on top of her door there. And I'm going to go through a few couple quickly. So this is a backyard alley garden where it had been concreted over by a previous gardener. Again, most people would give up and say, I have no space to garden, but they maximized it by using containers, which Terry will talk a little bit later about container gardening and how that can be used. And containers can be moved. That's our number one lesson that we'll learn about containers is just because these are large box containers and maybe a little heavy, doesn't mean they can't be rearranged into different spaces, replanted with different plants. And here they're using it as kind of a tree and shrub border between the row house next to them. And then they have their little herb garden in pots at the base of their deck. And then here's my community garden. So I said to apply for your local community garden space. This is on a super busy corner. There are long wait lists for some community gardens, so I recommend getting your name on as soon as possible because there's always turnover. Somebody's always moving. Somebody's always having the next step in their life, you know, having a baby, having getting married and moving away to that person's place. So there's always movement and it moves pretty quick. So as soon as you can get your name on the list, I recommend you do so. So I'm going to turn it over to Terry and she's going to talk about some of the design that we can do in small spaces and urban gardens to maximize our growing space.
Okay, thanks, Kat. Creating a focal point. A lot of times in small spaces, people think, oh, I can only put a small pot. I can only put a little bit. Not really. Plant something with impact. That's going to draw the eye to a corner, like the tree in the corner on the left. That's bringing your eye up and over. You're sitting down, but you're still enjoying a nice view from that one focal point. And then you have pottery. Pottery is always, to me, an easy way for a focal point. You can put a fountain in it or not. You can put a cut flower basin, if you will, or not. You can put a low basin in the top of that big jug and put some petals in it. That's a favorite of mine to do. And it's a great way to inspire the birds and the butterflies to stop by and take a sip. If you have a little rock in there that they can sit on, it's like watching nature up close and personal. And once again, you're drawing your eye to that focal point. Next. And then the borrowed view. I love the borrowed view. A lot of the buildings that I go to in my day job, I go up on the roof and they're using the beautiful sky as a backdrop, like in this picture. This raised bed, if you will, has several planters, different sizes, different shapes, and it's drawing your eye out to look beyond just what's in those pots. That to me is pretty and it's soothing. It's kind of like a vision of hope beyond what's right in front of your face. Next. And then, of course, in a small space garden, welcoming wildlife to the garden. This to me is the most simple way to really get bang for your buck in your garden. Planting some anything that will draw pollinators in. There's nothing like coming out the front door in the morning and seeing the butterflies, hearing the birds, watching them grab seeds, taking a bouquet inside. Creating something that will give back to nature in a small space is easier than you think. We just recently had a no-mow promotion, and that to me is the best way. Planting a little meadow. Bring it in. Everyone in the pollinator world will love it. Next. And then your fragrance options. Who would not want to sit beside a row of lavender, listening to the hum, the music of the bees? Who would not want to sit beside a pot of anything fragrant, lilies, mind you? That is the most beautiful thing because you're sitting outside, especially on a warm summer's night. The pot or the planting is nearby, and that perfume just permeates the air right where you are. Small spaces are such great places to add things of interest. Kathy?
Well, I was just gonna say that my lilies in a container right by my back door just opened, and at night, such a wonderful scent to come home to. And then another tip I just learned from a rose grower is to prune plants higher, so you're not having to bend over to smell them so much. And a container, of course, can bring them up to your height too.
Right. And one of my favorite summer annuals with fragrance, heliotrope. Summer does not go by without me purchasing heliotrope for my garden. Anywhere where I can sit and smell it, it's just amazing. My lilies opened up too, and wow, it's hard to come inside at night now. Next. And then right plant, right place. Nothing upsets me more than going by a small yard and blaze on sun with hostas in the front. Just don't do it. Know what your plant requires. That is key, and that's something that we focus on in our book. Use plants that apply to the conditions that you have. If you have full sun, do the research. Find things like a little meadow that gives back to nature. Find things that can take that full on sun. And we're going to have some major sun in the next couple months. So make sure that they're drought tolerant as well. And put those hostas in the shade so you can enjoy those leaves unscorched, because August does not mean your hostas should be yellow. Small spaces, and there are even fragrant hostas. Once again, if it's an enclosed area, oh my goodness. The fragrant hostas, I think it's August moon. Oh my, lights up your world. Next.
Yeah, I think any of those old-fashioned plantain lilies, like, you know, those have that beautiful honey scent. Pollinators love them. And the cardinals love eating the seeds once they're dried. So I was going to make a note too about right plant, right place, is to know, especially in a small space, the eventual mature size of the plant. So here we have a choice of hosta sizes. Hostas come in minis, little baby collector ones, up to some in substance which is a cultivar of hosta that's 3 to 5 feet wide.
Mhm.
And if I have a 5-foot bed, maybe I want something else besides sum and substance in there. So know the eventual mature size of your plants, and plant tags will lie to you. They might not give you the full story, or they might just have a generic hosta 12 to 24 inches and don't talk about that particular cultivar that you're buying.
Right. And honestly, Kathy, sum and substance makes a great focal point in a shade garden, in a
Mhm.
courtyard.
Yep.
That with the sound of water behind it, oh, amazing.
Yeah. Again, right plant, right place is
Yep.
the principle to use. Okay.
Yep.
I'll take the next slide, Terry,
Mhm.
and that's framing the view. So similar to what Terry said about borrow the view and creating a focal point, framing the view is guiding yourself or your visitors into the garden where you want them to look. So you can literally frame the view with an archway, as we do on the left, or it can be this little waterfall feature. So that's attracting attention because everybody loves the sound of running water. So water's being taken up here in this channel and like sheeting down. So it's like a constant waterfall sound, and that helps to combat the noise pollution around you. It's soothing. Any water feature you can add to a small space garden, I think, is beneficial, especially to our conscious, but also to wildlife. You're going to attract every living thing in the area, including the honeybees. And they love sitting there and sipping on my water garden. Okay, I'm going to go to using mirrors and lights. So this is kind of one of those inside decorating principles that we're using outside. And this is if you have dark corners of your small landscape and want to bounce some more light into it. You could use something as simple as the old-fashioned gazing ball, or sometimes it's called a witch's ball, the Victorian ball, to reflect surfaces and bring some that. You can also mount outdoor mirrors like these here. Of course, you want to check where the sun is coming in and what you're bouncing onto so you don't scorch or burn any leaves. But in these deep, dark, shady corners, it's just going to add some extra light there. I'm going to give a few more examples of using mirrors. So on the left is in a little alleyway with a clivia plant in front of it. And on the right is a large backyard pool against a dark ivy covered wall of a hospital next door. So to bring some light to this little backyard pool, they bounced it off these large mirrors. And I'll continue with the repeating design element. So earlier I showed a slide where they had 3 wisteria vines in a row along their narrow little garden. And imagine if that garden that I showed you had 1 wisteria, 1 honeysuckle, and maybe an annual vine. It would still be pretty, but it wouldn't be as soothing to the eye to have the repetition of the same plant used 3 times in a row. So we use that same principle in small spaces to expand the space and make it feel more coordinated and thereby larger. So here on the left is a little dock garden in Annapolis, and they have their tomato plants in the coordinated containers along the dock. So again, they could have had 1 in a whiskey barrel, 1 in a black nursery pot, 1 in this terracotta pot, but so much nicer to have them in coordinated containers, and your eye just kind of just skims right over it. And it's pleasing to the eye that way. On the right is a little vignette that was created on a parking pad for a party, and this is just with grasses or ornamental grasses in containers, creating a repetitive element for a greeting area. And then here's my favorite, Terry, use of repetition, which is collecting birdhouses. And on the left, these birdhouses are just a couple inches high, and they're all along this dark fence line that leads you into a back alley garden. So I love that use of repetition at eye height right there leading you in. And on the right, I bet some people who are watching from Washington, D.C. or who have ever been tourists here recognize this garden. This is the Ripley Garden, which is between Arts and Industry and the Hirshhorn. And it is all rooftop garden. It is your very great example of an urban small space city garden. Talk about heavy pressure from visitors, heavy pressures from pollution, and hundreds and thousands of visitors every year through this little garden. And what I love is she's put these birdhouses up on poles up into the back of the raised bed. So it draws your eye up and over, because otherwise you just walk up to this bed and you look straight into that hydrangea right here in front of you, or the salvia, and you probably don't look past it.
Right.
So that's a great way to guide you through that session. So that was one great repeated vertical element. So I'm going to turn it over to Teri to talk more about other vertical elements.
Other vertical elements, like if you have a wall, it doesn't have to be plain and simple. Plant something that's going to drape. When you drape, it draws your eye not just straight ahead, but it draws it down. And you can have something draped from above, like the obelisk in the middle. You're looking up, you're looking at the whole picture and not just looking down. Many times we miss what's actually happening in the garden because we're looking down. Think about what you can do to create a whole picture. Look left and right, up and down. It just adds value to a space, big or small, but it's captured better in a small space. Yeah. Going vertical. Look at these hanging on the side of a building. That's a planter. That's something different than just a pot on the corner or a pot on a step. And then these planters, you have a tall one in the middle, low ones on the side. Once again, you're basically creating a symphony, a visual symphony, if you will, so that you're not just looking straight ahead. That adds impact and also increases your growing space. How many people just have pots that are laying down and they're just down and you have nothing? There's like a blank palette behind you. Vertical growing allows you to add something to that space. Consider it living art. Next. And then get funny with it, because why not? It's your garden. Frame those succulents. That's different. Or you could even put a picture in between those two, because why not? And reuse those gutters. You'd be surprised. Reuse that PVC pipe that you might just have laying around. Plant something in it and let it trail. Let it trickle. Create a living fountain, if you will, if you allow things to drape and hang. It just adds interest, once again, to that naked canvas of a fence or a wall. Kath, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say, in our book, we talk a lot about recycling and reuse of inside elements, architectural elements, salvaged elements, like these gutters, and we describe several different projects like this. So I'm a huge proponent of frugal gardening and reuse as much as possible. And then I was going to have you comment next, Teri, on plants as screening.
Oh, screening. Screening is a good thing. It makes great neighbors. Trust me. If you want to sit outside, I love sitting outside and reading. And sometimes there's a lot of noise on one side of me. Well, they actually put up a fence. I am grateful, but I also have a living fence of my own that creates a buffer so you don't hear and you don't see. And it's not as cold as just a plain old fence. Using trees, using shrubs, once again, using those vertical plantings, that creates a sense of privacy. Our book has some excellent ideas, one of which, Kathy, I'm thinking about using myself. And one of my neighbors is even using one where they put curtains on their front porch because the houses are close together. But with that curtain, you don't even see your neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yep. I just took mosquito netting around my gazebo and draped it all the way around the gazebo this year, and it has made such a huge difference. I had done decorative fabrics, just a little bit on the gazebo between me and a neighbor, but I think the mosquito netting, I'm going to do this every year now. It just feels so great to sit inside that.
Yeah. Sometimes with a more dense fabric, you capture the heat. But with the netting or something light, tissue file, something where it will grow through, the air will flow through, you're still screened, you're not visible, and you have all the benefits.
Yeah, and it's definitely DIY if you can.
Yes.
All
Save
right.
money.
Do you want to comment on the espalier technique for vertical gardening?
I like the espalier once again because if you have a naked wall, you can train a plant to grow in any shape that you want. It's called the espalier technique. Fruit trees, roses. I've seen forsythia, which was really bizarre, but it made a nice statement because it made that barren space pop. You can do this, and it doesn't take a lot. Read up on it. Our book it offers many, many different concepts on things that you can do to make that barren space come to life.
Mhm. Yeah, and I would say espalier, it might not be a beginner thing to do, maybe a little bit more advanced because of the pruning that's required, or you can buy something that's already done, pre-done,
Mhm.
and mount that to a fence or wall. And I'm going to show in the next slide. Here is a fruit tree over some fava beans on a short brick wall on the right here, and they have 4 different grafted fruits on the one. So if it's a stone fruit, you can have different types of stone fruit, or you can do apples and pears, or 4 different pears, or 4 different apples. And you can have these ordered from fruit tree companies. You can also do the grafting yourself. Again, that's more like a gardening 2.0 or advanced technique, but fun to try out. And then on the left is a fun little technique, guiding up any vine on wires. Could be done, trained and done that way. So in that tiny 2 inches of growing space at the bottom there.
Right.
Yeah.
But I even saw earlier this spring sweet peas,
Mm-hmm.
finding peas that this lady was training up. It was so beautiful. Espalier, and think of that scent. You're adding scent
Mm-hmm.
and height on a barren space. It was absolutely amazing.
And I was also thinking of some of the edible vines, like our indeterminate tomatoes.
Mhm.
Would be nice to put up a wire, because they can get so crazy and
Yes,
take over a small space easily in your whole garden plot, really.
right.
All right, let's go on to our next idea, which are using wall or fence space with hanging containers.
You can't go wrong with a hanging plot. I have 2 window boxes in the front of my house, and then our friend Jim Charlier in Buffalo has a beautiful, beautiful hanging planter. Every year it's different. I can't wait to see it this year. If you have a space, whether it's on your house, once again, using those naked fences, put a hanging planter of any type on it. We showed a picture of the framed succulents. Here you can have something that will trail down, something that stays neat and compact. I love the one in the middle because as the season goes, you've got your thriller, your filler, and your spiller, all contained, but adding, I don't know, a sense of drama to that window, because why not?
Mm-hmm. And the one on the right is one I did from salvaged windows from a house that was torn down the street. And I have a deep, dark corner on the fence. So I was doing window boxes with shade annuals along there, just to have a little bit of color in that deep, dark corner. All right,
And
let's
the
go on
rabbits
to
don't get to it, right?
yes, and the rabbits will not eat your impatiens and coleus all the way up there. So I'm gonna turn it over to back to you, Terry, for containers.
Well, containers, I love containers. Any type of containers. Um, I went to Paris, my first pair of boots that I walked all over Paris in, they wore out. I drilled holes in the bottom and I planted them with succulents, because why not? It was a great way to remember a trip and a great way to utilize those succulents that broke in the pot I had them in. Containers offer diversity in your garden. And the benefits, you can move them around. The pots I put lettuce in this spring, I've now moved them to my shade garden just to try to extend it a little bit longer. I don't know if that's going to work this year, but in past years, I've been able to move things as the light changes in the garden. And you can mix and match. All your planters don't have to be just a flower. Add a vegetable. Add some lettuce behind those pansies that you planted last fall and add value to it. As the pansies fade out, you're harvesting lettuce. The container looks beautiful because you've got that mix of foliage and bloom. And if you don't use any chemicals, you can eat the pansy blooms and the lettuce. Who'd have thought? And then add maybe bulbs to it. You can layer bulbs in a container. Once again, it adds diversity to your garden. And in a small space, a collection of pots makes, oh, such a difference. I'm loving the one on the right because you got your tropicals. I would add perennials in there because why not? You got your tropicals you'll add when the season starts warming up. But if your perennials would preface that, you've got a symphony of color all in containers. What are your thoughts, Kathy?
Yeah, so I was just going to point out on the left, the bulbs you mentioned in pots, notice the pot feet on the bottom of the one towards the front of the set of 3 pots to lift it up for great drainage. And notice also on the right, it's just been watered. So water is draining out onto the brick, and they've raised up some of their pots onto upside down pots to get them off the ground, which is a great tip to have great drainage. Free draining as much as possible for the health of your plants. And then I was going to go on to talk a little bit about using cut flowers and still life to bring personality to your garden. So this is related to containers. It could be a container permanent planting, but these are just using cut flowers from your supermarket or from your own garden and making little vignettes to add personality for parties and for maybe a weekend that you're spending out in your garden to please yourself. So I love the one on the left, her little mailbox entry. And then on the right is a barbecue, and literally their entire backyard is just these boxwood meatballs around the deck. No color at all, nothing else, but they were able to add color and personality, even a pair of barbecue tongs in that arrangement there. So I thought that was a great idea. And then creating a scene. So when you have a really small space garden, as we do, every second of it is seen, every inch of it, I mean, is visible. So even your workspace areas and where you're gathering and harvesting. So just try to be as neat as possible and putting things away at the end of the day, because you don't have the luxury of just throwing it to the back and nobody's going back there. Oh, because they're going back there and they can see in. So just trying to make it as neat and nice, stacking like with like materials together helps a lot. And I like a good work area. I love a good potting bench.
Can I add a little something, Kathy? In a small space, like I am a hellebore fan. I love hellebore. In a shade garden, they just take you from winter up until May and sometimes June. Always have something, whether it's an old pill bottle, an old glass, a favorite vase. Have it near the door so that when you're coming into your small space, cut those blooms. Don't just leave them. You don't have to cut all of them, but cut those blooms, put them in a vase so that you can bring that beauty indoors in a small space, whether it's fragrance, whether it's color, impactful color, whether it's just the beauty of the bloom, a bulb. Have something that you can bring that beauty indoors, because why not?
Yeah, and I agree. And the outdoor arrangements and bringing the inside out, we'll talk about in a second. My little cat Fancy has joined the conversation. She couldn't stand that we were talking about beauty without her. So let's talk a little bit about color in the garden. So a lot of people with small space gardens think that they have to go monochromatic or just green with white flowers or just a green palette to open it up. They've been told like the same thing people were told to wear all black to disguise your weight. No, you should dress in color and drama and accentuate your best features. Same thing in the garden. So I'm showing a couple different blue and yellow combinations. So those opposite colors on the color wheel, that's blue and yellow, red and green, purple and orange. Those create drama in the garden. And then the colors that are next to each other on the color wheel, so pink, blue, purple, red, orange, yellow, the complementary colors, those create more of a feeling of synergy and togetherness in the garden. So I'm a big purple fan, so I'm sharing some purple slides here. And this is my bench by my little backyard pond here that one year I painted Barbie pink because came white and it was against a white fence. So it was not noticeable at all, but the second I painted it pink, everybody went over and sat on it. And now it's a teal blue, and one year it was purple. And then on the right is a neighbor of mine who does decorative outdoor paintings. And so that's just to show you can bring artwork outside. It doesn't have to be artwork that's so precious. Could be something you bought at a flea market and it's just lasts for a season or two and then falls apart. So what? It's just meant to be ephemeral, just like your flowers, enjoyed for the moment and then go on. And then just take a digital picture of it for it to last. And then here's a great example. The same lady who did the gutters that we showed, the gutter garden earlier, she painted a lot of her accents on her front porch and little side garden, that same bright blue. So it could be orange, could be chartreuse green, whatever color is yours. Do you want to say a little bit about colors, Terry? And I'm going to show the next one.
It brings people out into the garden. It's inviting and it makes you happy. You know, I'm really addicted to going and buying artwork from secondhand shops or rescuing them and hanging them on my blank wall behind my house. Why? Because it's like I'm in my outdoor living room with my paintings. And whatever painting I choose, I put pots below it to make it a story.
Yeah, and this is a little backyard garden that they just moved in, didn't have much. So they took some old pieces of architectural metal, painted them, and made little nice vignettes here. And we talked earlier about that fabric accent. So on the upper right, on their little pergola, they have some fabric accent to soften those edges. And then I think we're going to close out because we're getting up on time with adding a water element, which I touched on earlier, to the garden, both to attract wildlife for soothing and noise reduction, but also just because it's great for adding beauty and a meditative element. And then when it's a dry summer day, nothing is better than scooping out some rainwater from your rain barrel or your little pond and adding it to the plants around it. So I'm showing a couple other water features in small gardens. And then I'm going to jump ahead, and I think we'll take questions in a second, but I'm going to jump really quickly through.
Something about water too.
Yep, that was my little alarm. Yep.
Water is very soothing. Try this. If you can get an inexpensive fountain, place it in your garden where the sound can gently echo. And at the end of the day, usually at night, listen to that water. Next thing you know, that's better than any sedative anyone could ask for.
Very true. And I was going to say, if you're a patio, rooftop, balcony gardener, those tabletop fountains are the best. I have a couple of those. And outside, you want to bring them in for the winter because the motor pump will probably run out, but they'll last for a few seasons. And then we're closing out with our intimate seating areas. And I always say it's not a garden if it doesn't have seating, then it's a farm. It's a place to work if it doesn't have seating in it. It's just a place you go out and grow things, and that's a farm, but that's not a garden. So put some seating somewhere, even if you don't sit into it too long, for you to enjoy. And here's some great seating ideas. A little bench under an evergreen tree, tropical little vignette here on the right. I love to have the seating, the benches, Terry, push back into the beds. So in both these cases, the benches could have been pulled out and onto the lawn or downhill, but setting them actually into the beds in a small space garden brings you fully enclosed into the garden.
And if there's one rule, if you will, of gardening, period, you need to have a seat. A garden should be enjoyed, not just another chore or a task. Having seating in the garden, it just invites you to go, why don't you just take a seat and look at what you've just done? Why don't you take a seat and look at that dragonfly on that drop of water, or look at the bees dancing in your shrubbery? Please have a seat in your garden.
Mhm. Amen. And so look, we're showing some personality from a jazz musician, and on the left, somebody who wasn't able to hide their compost pile or their tools. So like we said, in a small space garden, everything is on display. You might as well have fun with it. Here's some more pieces of personality and decoration for your garden. And we don't want everything to be cookie cutter and the same, right? So we're inviting and actually giving you permission. So some people feel like they need permission to share their personality in their garden. And then if all else fails, Terry, use humor.
Yep.
So
Yep.
here's a couple of fun signs. So this one was a solid lawn of dandelions on the left. So that's their field of dreams for what could come. And then on the right is a small little AC unit tucked in there, and that's their little secret garden, since they knew people would snoop back there. And then we're going to open it up for questions. And while we're doing that, this is our contact information and links. So you can get both Terry and I through our blog. Is a website listed there. We are at WDC Gardener is my Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest. And Terry is Cottage and Court on Facebook. You'll find me under Washington Gardener Magazine or my name. And then Terry's at Cottage in the Court. And you can pick up my podcast that comes out weekly, Garden DC, wherever you listen to podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Apple, etc. And then our book, again, is The Urban Garden, 101 Ways to Grow Food and Beauty in the City, is available wherever you order or buy books. We recommend bookshop.org because that can be supporting your local library or bookstore. You can designate where the proceeds for that go. And I'm just going to show you the copy of the book. So it's a hardback book. So maybe not beach reading, but hey, it could still be a great summer read.
Yeah.
So I'll
And
go back.
it is a
Go ahead.
great read.
Mhm.
All
It's
right.
for offering up ideas. I do see one question about water features without electricity.
Mhm.
There are some solar powered ones
Yep.
that work great.
Yeah, I have a solar bubbler. So
Me
usually
too.
it comes with a like a little solar panel, and they are so much better now than they were 10 to 15 years ago.
Yep.
Because they would just break at the end of the season and I would have to replace them every year. But
Mhm.
yeah, the solar is so much better. So you just
Yeah.
usually have a little solar panel either built into it or that you put a little stake nearby.
Mhm.
And so much better to use those, and they work great.
And the beauty of them also is you can put them in any type of container you want, as long as it has a solid bottom, a shallow pot, a top of a focal point. The benefits are endless.
Mhm.
Jane also asks if the book covers specific areas such as the Pacific Northwest, or is it more of a general guide? And
Do you want me to address it, Terry?
maybe
Yeah.
you can give
Yeah.
a suggestion
So,
for where
yeah.
folks can go to find more specific.
Sure. So our book is published internationally.
Mhm.
So you won't see growing zones or specific plants usually in there because somebody in South Africa or Australia is not going to be able to figure that out. So sorry, I got a frog in my throat.
Mhm.
So again, it's internationally, so we keep it generic and open for the plant palette and growing zone. But I recommend following local garden writers or garden
Mhm.
communicators. So if you're in the Pacific Northwest, I can recommend some of those to you. If you're in the Mid-Atlantic, Terry and I specialize in Mid-Atlantic gardening. And then the South, same thing. So you can go to GardenCom. So it's all one word, gardencom.org, and you can find local garden communicators who might have a podcast specifically for your area, or garden column in your local paper, or even like Southern Living magazine. Depending on what area you're in, that might be the one for you.
And I think that that's the beauty of our book. It offers you concepts. So you might see something in our book that is for a shade garden. Maybe you have more dappled shade that gets more sun than shade. Keep flipping. There's something in the book for you.
Mhm.
I have a couple of questions for you that are maybe a little bit more philosophical. In the book, you say the permission to not to have to tackle everything and focus on just one finite aspect of a topic is freeing. And I was wondering if you could say more about that and what your experience with that has been.
Well,
What-
I'll take that one.
Uh-huh.
When a small space garden, and Kathy, you can chime in too. Case in point, my front yard is smaller than my back. On the back, I have a third of an acre. On the front, it is truly an urban garden. I had a tree taken down. All of a sudden, what was dappled shade is now full on sun. I'm focusing on that sun area right now, putting in native plants, not all natives. I'm mixing it up because I truly believe in diversity in the garden. Putting in things that are going to draw a myriad of pollinators to give back to nature. I'm also adding pops of color, that wow factor, because now that area is basically a garden room, which in an urban garden technically is a garden room. So make it your own. And that's my philosophy on focusing. I'm focusing on that area. I'm on year 2 of focusing on it, but I'll get it right by next year. But
Mhm.
that's the benefit of an urban space. Kat?
Yeah, I think what's freeing about small space gardens is you have, again, a small space, limited resources, limited time. We're all super busy these days. So I would say do one bed or one area at a time. Don't try to do it all at once. You'll want to. But
Right.
if you give yourself permission to say, you know what, this year is this area, and next year I'm going to budget and work on that side garden, or I'm going to build out a vegetable garden with raised beds in year 3. So if you make a 3 to 5 year plan, then you know it's coming and you can concentrate on what you want to do at the moment and not have to feel like everything all at once. All is super amount of pressure for a lot of people, and they feel like they have to do it all and be it all in all aspects of their lives. And the garden shouldn't be one of those aspects. It shouldn't be a additional pressure on you.
Right. Because then it's a job and it's not enjoyable. The garden should be enjoyed and savored.
Cheers. Cheers to that. Um, one of in the food growing section of your book, you mention growing cool season edibles. And I was hoping you could share a bit of information about that with our audience.
Sure, I can take that, Tara, if you want. So depending on your climate, so those of us in zone 6 and up, usually we have our shoulder seasons of growing. So we have a long summer growing season, but we also have spring and fall and some overlap in winter. And more with climate change, I'm finding my cool season garden that I plant in fall is wintering over into spring. And then when the heat hits and we get a couple 90-degree days in a row, then the cool season plants will bolt. So examples of cool season plants would be the brassica family. So we're talking about broccoli, cabbages, kale, cauliflower, and then your root vegetables like turnips, carrots, radishes, and then your cool season herbs are those herbs like cilantro, parsley. They're usually the more herbaceous leafy herbs that go to flower and set seed. So cilantro, as soon as the heat hits, will go to flower and set seed. And then you'll have coriander, which is great. But you won't be able to have cilantro in the hottest part of the summer because it kind of just melts away in our gardens. So, and the cool season garden is great because a lot less insect pressure and a lot more comfortable to be out there gardening. And that's also when you're going to be growing most of your greens. So the summertime, hot season is more of the fruit producing, and fruits as in tomatoes, peppers, corn, eggplant, that sort of thing. So it's absorbing all that solar energy to make those big bountiful fruits. Whereas in the cool season, it's more the leafy greens that you're growing at that time of year.
Or root crops as well.
And root crops.
And don't think that if you missed your season. I mean, my cilantro is done. And
Mhm.
normally I'll have cilantro until the end of June. It is so gone, it's not funny. But the beauty of it is I saved the seed and I will restart that in late July for my winter time.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
never
like
waste the season. Yeah.
I was
Oh,
gonna
that's
say
a
a
great
lot of
note.
Yeah, a lot of our Asian greens too are really doing well wintering over. We're having milder winters, where those used to kind of peter out by January. And I'm still harvesting from them every week through January, February, where I was not even going out into the garden during those months, and
Yeah.
a decade ago.
Yeah.
It's learning to adapt to the climate change.
Yeah. And
Um,
that's what this is about. If you learn to not give up on the garden, notice the changes, appreciate the changes, and think about, so now I know next year, plant my cilantro earlier, harvest it more frequently, save it, store it somehow, or use it. With any herbs, use them. Same thing with my flowers. Maybe I can start them 2 weeks earlier if I'm growing from seed, because our climate is changing. We don't have to give up on the garden. We'd have to learn to help our gardens adapt. It's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I know we have a hard stop at the top of the hour. So let me just show the closing slide.
Okay, do you need me to stop? Oh, you stopped the
Oh,
share. Good.
got
Okay.
it. Thank you. And I want to thank you both so much for being here today. And thank you to our audience for joining and being a part of Green America's Climate Victory Gardens community. Together, we can make a real difference in creating positive change for our planet and its people. You can keep the momentum going and stay connected by subscribing to our newsletter to remain informed about our latest campaigns, events, and sustainability tips. Your support fuels our work toward a greener, fairer future. Consider donating today to help us continue our vital programs and initiatives, including these free gardening webinars. Every contribution counts. Remember, your actions matter, and together we can build a more sustainable and just world. Thank you for your commitment to creating positive change, and we look forward to seeing you at future events. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Take care, everyone.